Hello and welcome to another Nerve podcast, Hope Beyond Brain Disease, and our second Cuppa with Katy. I'm Leigh Hatcher. Katy Fitzgerald has had a wealth of experience helping people with dementia and their families. She's a psychotherapist and group facilitator who's worked in private practice, including Sydney Cognitive. And every now and then we share a cuppa together to tap into the wealth of her experience and insights. This time, perhaps a curious but really important subject, communication in dementia. Katy, great to see you again for a cuppa. Thanks
Lovely.
So much for joining us.
You're welcome. Good to be here.
Love these conversations. Now, you say that the arena of communication is often where dementia is first evident, or at least maybe suspected.
Yes, that's right. The classic will be one person saying to the other, I told you that, and the other person not remembering, those sorts of things, which can often go on. Maybe that happens a little bit more often than other times. Just forgetting words. The person that may have dementia will just lose words.
Mind you, we all do that. Or am I alone? We
No,
all do that sometimes.
You're definitely not alone, and I think that's what makes it difficult to pick it up. And
Yes.
people's first reaction might be, I forgot something, so what? We all do that, absolutely. But there's an absolute difference between our normal, memory playing up sometimes than dementia. It can also be other things like really losing track of where somebody is in a conversation, and also a sense perhaps of withdrawing from conversations because maybe that person at some level has a feeling that something can be wrong, and it can have an effect on their confidence levels, and it can bring about anxiety. So sometimes the way somebody responds is to withdraw from conversations.
So that process no doubt continues.
It does. It's not going to necessarily be every day. People have good days and bad days. But over a period of quite often around a year or maybe more, people will say in retrospect that that's what they had been noticing. So more and more people will lose track of where they are in a conversation and forget those words. So it becomes much more of a pattern than might be for other people. It becomes more of a pattern than it might be for somebody who doesn't have dementia.
Okay. My guess is it might take some time for both the person with these communication issues, let's call it that for the moment, and their loved ones to connect the dots to dementia.
Definitely. It's certainly not the first thing that you think about. The first thing that you think about is, I forgot where I was up to in the conversation. You don't necessarily jump to dementia.
No.
And there can be some denial going on at that point as well, definitely, which is a self-protective mechanism. Nobody wants to think that. Yeah, people will, at some level, look for some other reason why this might be happening. They might say they're stressed or they're tired or, they've got a lot on their mind.
And for probably a fair few people, the denial continues for quite some time. And that probably becomes quite challenging for everyone, I guess.
It is. Like, we can all deny things that are going on that we're uncomfortable at. It's a self-protective mechanism for us. And it can be difficult because the person that will be displaying some of those symptoms will have a very different experience than people around them. So people around them will be noticing, and the person with those symptoms, has a very different experience of it. So there's a real need to be understanding and gentle with people at that point, and not to suggest that it's anyone's fault.
No. But issues have to be kind of raised or dealt with at some time.
Absolutely.
What's the best way for either a loved one or a friend to approach kind of the D word, I suppose?
Yeah, the D word.
Yes.
Look, I think it's always better to have clarity than
Yes.
to be confused and unsure about what's going on. So again, very gently and not in a threatening way, if you suggest to someone, look, maybe we need to explore what's happening here. And the first port of call is your GP, to go and have a chat with your GP. And that can be confronting. But if it is an illness, some form of dementia happening, it's not going to go away. So it's best just to be really clear about it and know what it is. You know how to seek out treatment and services.
There are still lots of people who'd say, no, there's nothing wrong.
Absolutely.
I don't need the doctor.
Yeah.
I've actually heard of people who the spouse will go to the GP themselves and say, look, I'm really concerned about my
Yes.
husband. If I get him to come in, can you have a chat with him? Is
Yeah.
that a strategy?
Look, it is. People respond in so many different ways,
Yes.
absolutely. And people can hang on to that denial for a long time.
Which I get.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen people that have fairly evident dementia that are still in denial. The other thing that can make it tricky is because of the nature of dementia, some people genuinely forget. Obviously, they genuinely forget. So there can be a little bit of it can be difficult sometimes to know whether it's denial or whether it's genuinely forgetting that conversation and really lacking insight into what's going on. So there's a huge need to be gentle and respectful of people. It's an illness. It's nothing that they're doing. It's an illness. So I think if you can put it in that context sometimes, it can be a little bit easier for people to accept.
Got any other practical suggestions for how someone might kind of cut through that denial if they're living with someone?
I guess the notion of this is not you, it's an illness. It's not the person. The person is not their dementia. Their person is not their illness. What may be happening is symptoms of an illness. So I think it's really important to, as I said before, just to be really gentle with this person and say, look, if there's something going on, we're going to get through it together. Our family and our friends will support us.
I'm on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. So to make that person, perhaps with those symptoms, to feel a little bit less confronted or a little bit less nervous about it. I know it's really difficult, but I guess the other side of it is you can't prevent it. Like, if this is what's happening, it is going to progress at its own pace.
And better to deal with it earlier rather than later.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is all round. It's much better to deal with it because there can be medication that can help. But also just, knowing what's actually happening equips people better than being in this sort of space that's anxious and people not really knowing what's going on.
In general communication issues with someone who either has dementia or is suspected of it, are there better or worse times to communicate with them?
Absolutely. We'll get some of the bad ones out of the way. If somebody's tired, it's not a great time to communicate.
Dementia or not.
Absolutely. It's the same for all of us. If somebody's in the middle of doing something, they're, reading a book or they're focused on an activity, that's not going to be a great time to try and have this conversation. Sometimes as the day goes on, people can get more tired, so later in the day probably isn't a great time. Some of the better times to have a conversation is when somebody's a bit more relaxed and calm, like not in the middle of a communication issue. If you're having that issue, that's not a great time to bring it up with somebody.
No.
When somebody's a little bit more calm, sometimes if you can combine communication with another activity, like going for a walk or washing up, so it doesn't make the communication feel so intense, like we must sit down and talk. If you just make it a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah, so you say that the environment in which communication also happens really matters. Are there better or worse places?
Shopping centres aren't the greatest.
Yes.
Because there's so much going on, too many people around, and it's really noisy. So, shopping centres, if you're trying to have a conversation over loud TV, music, radio, that's just not going to work.
Yes.
Also, if there are too many people around, if there are 6 or 7 people having a conversation, you could think that nobody's really listening to anyone.
It'll do my head in just generally, yes.
So if somebody has dementia or some of those symptoms, that's going to be a really difficult situation for someone. So if you've got too many people around. So what helps is just having a smaller group of people, 2 or 3 other people in a more of a relaxed environment.
Can I ask you this? Why is it important for the person with dementia to maintain communication skills? And how, I suppose, can you help in that?
That's a huge question.
Yeah.
So let me answer the second part of it first. There are a lot of things that can be done, absolutely. In communicating with somebody that has dementia or perhaps has dementia, just allow more time in the conversation. We all tend to, talk fairly quickly and go at 100 miles an hour. So just allow a little bit more time because the person is processing what's going on and that processing happens at a slower time. So just allow a little bit more time. If somebody appears to be losing a word or they're stuck in a conversation, you might just say to them, do you want me to try and help out here? Some people will and some people won't. So just ask that person if they want a bit of a prompt. And I also say to people, like if you're stuck in a conversation, it's not the end of the world. I say to people, breathe deeply or relax. or laugh. That's going to make it a little bit easier because anxiety sets in as well. So you're trying to lessen that anxiety. I had a client once who said whenever she forgot a word, she said bananas. So all her family and friends knew that she was struggling. So they would jump in and try and help her out.
And they'll laugh with her, not at her. Yes.
Exactly. So it's not like, try not to make it such a huge deal. You know, you've forgotten where you are. It's okay. It will come back. Make eye contact with the person. So the person with dementia will know that you're talking to them. Physical contact, just putting your hand on their shoulder or something, they know that you're really having that conversation with them. Say less things in the sentence. Don't make sentences long and complicated and saying, you know, we have to do 10 different things.
Good
Just
point.
keep them simple. And also communicate for fun. Communication doesn't have to be this really heavy, we must sit down and communicate. Communicate for fun. Let the conversation go wherever it wants to go. If somebody says something that is inaccurate or incorrect, it doesn't matter. You don't have to jump in and correct the person. Let it go. Communicate about old times, communicate about childhood. And often those memories are still really there, and it's a lovely way of communicating with people. You also asked me why it's important. It's incredibly important to maintain communication skills because that's the way we stay connected to people. It's one of the primary ways that we stay connected to people. And we are discovering more and more that one of the key things with people with dementia that will help them manage their illness is to stay socially connected. People can have a tendency to isolate a little bit because they might lose confidence, but that is really not a helpful thing to do. So it's really, really important to stay socially connected to people. It doesn't mean you have to go out and be the life of the party, but just to have people around you. It's certainly part of the treatment, to stay connected. So maintaining your communication skills is a key part of that. Speech therapy can often help as well. That can give people confidence to keep those communication levels up.
Here's my question, though. So far we've been discussing verbal communication. There's much more to
Absolutely.
communication than just kind of speaking. I remember once reading about the 7-38-55 rule. Only 7% of our communication comes through words, 38% comes through tone of voice. Body language accounts for 55%. So it's much more than
Absolutely.
about speaking. Yeah.
Makes me hope that people are listening to us today. Look, I think that is very true. And I was thinking about this question. I want to talk about some other ways of communicating with people that are just lovely. And I thought of this. Music is magic.
Totally.
Art is awesome.
Yes.
Laughing is life-affirming.
Oh, can you say those three again? That's classic.
Music is magic.
Yes.
Art is awesome. Laughing is life-affirming.
Great stuff.
And you look the effect that it's had on you and I.
Absolutely,
Just talking about,
yeah.
It lifts people's spirits. It bypasses that conscious, critical brain that says, stupid thing, you've forgotten that word again. And it goes to this lovely emotional centre that's still really operating.
And I've seen people with dementia who are just sitting there in an aged care home and nothing's going on. I remember this guy, his head was bowed, he wasn't asleep. Someone put some headphones and an old hymn, and he lifted his head and he became alive and started singing the words and the right words.
Leigh, I see it all the time.
Yeah,
I saw
bet.
it last week. Absolutely.
Great.
This lovely old lady wasn't really responding very much, and I was playing Stranger in Paradise and she started singing it. It is absolutely magic.
Something going on there.
It goes to that lovely, more relaxed, still really alive part of us, which is the emotional and creativity centre.
Yeah.
So those three areas are just beautiful. Like, listen to music with somebody. Do some art. Scribble on a piece of paper. It doesn't have to go in an art gallery. Communicate through other activities. You might watch a silly TV show. Just make little comments about that. But also through physical touch. You can really communicate your care and concern for somebody. Holding hands, a massage, a hug, a smile, brushing somebody's hair. They're all really lovely ways of communicating with people and really connecting with somebody. Somebody with even more advanced dementia, their emotional centre is still very much intact. Their ability to communicate around it is going to be compromised, but they will know whether somebody's being nice to them or not. That's the heart of communication. something coming from one person to another person. So there are myriad other ways of communicating with people. So use those things as strategies as well. The other thing in communication that is really important is our tone. We might say to each other, oh, sorry, I didn't mean that the way that it sounded.
Yes.
So we really, as much as humanly possible, just try and monitor your tone, because people with dementia, even at advanced stages, will pick up the emotion that you're carrying in that tone very much. You may not always feel it, but if you can maintain a calm and relaxed tone, that's really going to get you a long way. I remember a client once who said to me, I can get my wife to do anything, I just do it with a smile. And actually, when we smile, when we speak, that changes our tone. You might be feeling frustrated, but if you can manage to literally smile, it changes your tone, and that's the part that will communicate directly with a person with dementia.
It strikes me there are so many great communication tips regardless of whether you have dementia that you're talking about.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When you look at what is helpful in communicating with somebody with dementia, it is not a long way from what is good when you communicate with anyone.
Too right.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you one question about perhaps a more advanced stage of dementia? I always remember this. My wife worked in an aged care home with people living with dementia. And she spoke about one woman who was on the bench outside, and she said, I'm waiting for my husband here at the bus stop. And my wife entirely went along with the conversation and just kind of continued talking about this scenario with the bus stop. And I said, should you really be doing that? That's just not the truth. I mean, that's not reality. And she said, no, go with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's her reality. It's that woman's
Yes.
reality. And it really, really is her reality. So to say, look, that's silly, your husband isn't here, that's just going to cause distress for her, unnecessary distress. So go along with the story, definitely. But then you might say, oh, look, you know what? I just got a message from your husband. He's going to be here later. So you distract the person and you bring them back into a safe environment. There's very little point in correcting somebody. Meet them where they are and then bring them back to a safe environment.
On reflection, I think there's great wisdom in that when you hear that kind of explanation. So the kind of communication connection really can continue to quite later stages of
Absolutely.
dementia.
You need to adjust your strategies, but it's really important to remember that that person is still there.
Yes.
Their emotional centre is still there. They'll pick up if you're being kind to them. They'll pick up if you care about them. They'll pick up if you're being angry and frustrated with them. So as difficult as it is sometimes, just remember that person is still there.
What great wisdom. I love our cuppas.
So do I.
Katy.
Keep up the leaf tea.
Yes. Cheers. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
You're very welcome.
And thank you for joining us for our Nerve podcast, Hope Beyond Brain Disease. I'm Leigh Hatcher. Our website has a whole host of information and resources at www.sydcog.com.au.